Random deep question of the day. Where does the desire to control other people come from? I honestly do not understand it. It's shocking to me that entire subcultures, even governments, spring up around campaigns to control other people's behavior and limit their rights. If you grew up with authoritarian parents or in a high control religion like I did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So today we're going to unpeel the layers of authoritarianism and uncover some of the mechanics and try to answer that question of what makes a person want to control other people. I'll also point out some hallmarks of authoritarian behavior so that you can be aware of it in your own life. And finally, I'm going to share some tips on how to deal with authoritarians in your life, because nobody should live in fear of other people attempting to control their behavior. We all should be free to be who we really are without fear of punishment and retribution from other people who are just scared of something that's different. So be sure to stick around to the end. To understand authoritarianism, we must strip away their moral justifications for their behavior. We must look at the biological and psychological mechanics underneath their desire to control other people. That desire to control others is not usually about the other people at all. It's often a defense mechanism of the authoritarian's dysregulated inner state. At its foundation, authoritarianism is a response to the controller's internal existential anxiety. To them, different means dangerous. Their false assumption is, if I can control others and my entire environment, I can predict the future and then I'll be safe. The reality is that predictions only create a temporary illusion of safety and security. By limiting rights and controlling behavior, the authoritarians in your life, your parents, your pastors, are effectively trying to hedge against their own internal fear of chaos, hell, or social shame. Look, it's a fact that most humans struggle to regulate their own emotions. Authoritarians often use external regulation. Instead of doing the necessary internal work to be okay with other people's actions and behaviors, they demand that you change your choices, your behaviors, so that they feel safe. But what does this do to their relationships? It absolutely destroys secure attachment. It replaces the healthy inquiry, I'm interested in you, I want to know who you really are, with the unhealthy, I am only safe if you be who I tell you to be. Now, there's an evolutionary aspect of this as well. Humans, by nature, are tribal creatures. We cannot escape that fact. We evolved in small groups when fitting in literally meant the difference between survival and death. So ensuring group norms or dogma effectively ensured the group's survival. But in our modern world, this has a very dark undertone. It manifests in othering. They attempt to maintain cohesion in their own subculture while simultaneously labeling other subcultures, outsiders, as dangerous or sinful. This effectively builds a false sense of elite belonging to their own social group. But that's actually just a cheap way of trying to satisfy their need for meaning and belonging. So while authoritarians love to project this idea of strength and power, the desire to control others is always a reflection of someone's fear of their internal powerlessness. Your parents in those churches, they aren't powerful. They're simply terrified of what they can't predict. They use control to try to unlock a sense of safety and security. But because that is built on the suppression of others, it always fails to maintain genuine peace. It's also important to point out that even though we may understand the mechanics behind authoritarians' desire for control, their fear of unpredictability, that does not excuse their behavior towards others. Because trying to control a person, attempting to force them into a mold, a way of being that is not truly authentic to them, is damaging to that person. It's harmful to that person. And there is no justification ever for harming another person because they are not the way you want them to be. So if you're new to this idea of authoritarianism, and I understand, if you're born into it and growing up in it, you might not be able to recognize it for what it truly is until you can escape and get some outside perspective. So I'm going to share some hallmarks of authoritarian behavior. So the first characteristic or hallmark of an authoritarian is binary thinking. They see the world through a gross distortion. Everything is either black or white, right or wrong, us or them, saved or damned. Any nuance is treated as a threat. So there's always an obvious tell to look out for when interacting with an authoritarian. If you ask a clarifying question like, well, why is this bad? They will almost always react with anger and defensiveness rather than with providing you a logical answer, because they view curiosity as insubordination. Another hallmark of authoritarians is the for your own good trap. They frame their control as benevolence. However, this creates cognitive dissonance in the person being controlled. You feel oppressed while they are telling you that they love you and they're doing this for your own good. Do not be fooled. This is simply manipulation by another name. So here's what to look for to identify the for your own good trap. Disagreeing with their methods will be interpreted as rejecting their love. The third hallmark of an authoritarian is limiting access to outside information. They use a variety of methods to limit your access to information or outside perspectives that differ from theirs. In my family and the churches I grew up in, this looked like labeling outside sources as ungodly, worldly, corrupt, and dangerous. So the obvious tell here is instead of engaging with the alternative perspective, they will attack the source of that perspective. They'll attack the source of the counter argument rather than the argument itself. The fourth hallmark of authoritarianism that we'll talk about today is a fragile hierarchy. Their status is absolutely not based on competence. It is based on position. Because I'm the parent, my way goes. Because I'm the pastor and I said so. They demand respect, which is code for submission, but rarely give you any respect in return. So now that you have some keys to identify authoritarians in your life, let's talk about some ways of dealing with it. Since you cannot change their operating system, and you don't want to be the type of person who tries to control others like they do, you need to focus on regulating your own internal state when dealing with authoritarians. You may have heard about the gray rock method. What gray rocking means is essentially becoming uninteresting to the authority figure in your life. The reason for that is they often thrive on emotional friction and big emotional reactions from you as they are attempting to control you, because that proves that they have impact. And remember, that feeds their desire to feel like they're in control of the chaotic world around them. So if you offer no friction, they will probably, hopefully, move on to another target. So when they provoke or demand, don't resist, don't emotionally react. You can simply offer short, non-committal answers. Okay, I see. That's interesting. Another tool you can use is to avoid justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining your perspective or your position. Because to an authoritarian, an explanation is not clarification, it is a negotiation. By trying to explain yourself, you are signaling to them that your position is negotiable. So the fix here is to set the boundary and then don't try to justify it. Essentially, stop talking. For example, if they're trying to force you to go to church with them, simply say, no, I'm not going. They will, of course, attempt to open a dialogue with you, attempt to get you to signal to them that your position is negotiable. But to you, it's not. By attempting to justify or explain why you don't want to go to church, you're just opening the door for them to attempt to manipulate you. Here, silence is key. Another way to limit an authoritarian's influence in your life is to strictly control the information that you share with them. Protect your internal state. Do not share your goals, your dreams, or your struggles with them. Why? Because anything that you share with them will be weaponized against you in the future. They will use those struggles or your dreams or goals as proof of your incompetence or your rebellion. The fourth and final way to deal with an authoritarian in your life is to simply show up as the adult in the room. Because authoritarians often will try to stick you into an adult-child dynamic, where they are the controlling adult and you are the submissive, passive, powerless child. Here the mechanism is they scold, you rebel, or submit. But if you stay in the adult role, you avoid being forced into the submission or rebelling dynamic. So just stay in the adult role as best you can. I know it's difficult. You're going to want to react emotionally, especially if this has been an ongoing dynamic in your life for a long time. Simply speak calmly, rationally, and factually. Ignore their emotional state. Do not let them pull you into their emotional reactivity. If they yell, you lower your voice. If they accuse, ask for data. And if they cannot match your adult state, just end the conversation and leave. So today we've talked about authoritarianism and where that desire to control other people comes from. We've learned that a person's desire for control often stems from their own fear of chaos. We've learned not to excuse this behavior even though we know the root of it. Attempting to control, oppress, or suppress a person's authentic expression of themselves is a violation of that person's inherent sovereignty. And that is unethical, and that behavior should never be excused. We talked about some hallmarks of authoritarian behavior so that you can be on the lookout for this in your own life. Binary thinking, the for your own good trap, information control, and a fragile hierarchy. We also provided some tips and tricks for dealing with authoritarians in your own life in order to reduce their influence over who you are. The gray rock method, becoming simply uninteresting emotionally to them, avoiding justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining yourself in your position, limiting the information that you share with the authoritarian, and showing up constantly as the adult in the relationship. So to wrap up, remember, you cannot change their internal operating system, and you don't want to be the type of person who attempts to control others like they do. So your only course of action is to regulate your own internal state and very carefully curate, how you act and behave around the authoritarian. So look, I know I'm not the only one who grew up with authoritarian parents and in a high control religion. So many people in the 30s and 40s are coming out and speaking out against the abuse and the trauma that they experienced at the hands of the authoritarians in their life as they were growing up. So if that's you, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to hear how you escaped the authoritarians in your life. Okay, that's all. Peace.